Okay. Out of everything that I teach, this lecture, this topic is the most personally meaningful to me. Because in many ways, my shift, my journey from perfectionism, and it's an ongoing journey, a journey that it goes on right now as we speak. My journey from perfectionism to the pursuit of excellence is most intimately linked with my journey toward becoming happier. So I want to share with you some personal things that I've been through. Some of them are in my book, but I want to expand the story beyond squash. So I started playing squash at the age of 11, which was after giving up an illustrious, passionate career as a basketball star. It was about that time when I realized that NBA was not going to happen for me. I started playing squash and almost immediately started playing every day. My days revolved, my life at that time revolved around squash. I would wake up at 5 a.m. in the morning and go for a run. I would come home, have my food, go to school. Right after school, it was next to the squash, not far from the squash courts. I would go to the squash courts, play with my coach, work out in the gym, play games, and then late afternoon I would go home, do my homework, and then go to sleep. For years, this was my pattern. It was difficult, it was tough, especially the interval training workouts with my coach. However, it was nothing. The toughness was nothing compared to the emotional difficulties at the time. I was constantly, with almost no recovery, no reprieve, I was constantly stressed. There was always a knot that I felt in my stomach. It was real, as if there was a ball here. The knot was especially pronounced, especially difficult after a poor performance in practice, when it didn't match to the standards that I had for myself. And it almost never matched. The knot was at its severest during tournaments. Very often I would get to a final of an important tournament and choke and lose the final, even at times when I was supposed to win, on paper at least. That knot didn't go away. When it went away, it was only for very short periods of time. But I knew that that knot would go away. And I was sustained by the belief, by the vision, by my personal mission at the time of winning the Israeli national championships. I said to myself, if I win this, then I'll be happy. Then I will be calm. And it's all going to be worth it. Why? Because no pain, no gain. In 1986, I reached the final of the Israeli national championships. And I lost. I was devastated. I was devastated even though I was the youngest player to ever reach the final, even though I had beaten players higher than me on the rankings. I was devastated for months. But still, I went on. No pain, no gain. And I continued to train and work hard. In 1987, I met the same player in the final, and this time I won. I was ecstatic, joyous, happier than I'd ever remembered myself being. And at that moment I said to myself, it all paid off. It was all worth it. Because now I was ready to be happy. I went out with my friends and family and we celebrated. And about 4 hours later, after the celebrations, I went back home. I went back home and wanted, before going to sleep, just for one last time, savor, enjoy that feeling of joy, of ecstasy, of pure bliss that I'd earned. And I sat down on my bed, and then suddenly, without any warning, the exact same feeling, the exact same emotion, the exact same knot returned. And I started to cry. Not the same tears of joy that I cried 4 hours earlier. But tears of pain and helplessness. They're not returning. I thought, well, maybe it's the low following a high. And I hoped that it would go away, but it didn't go away. And a few weeks later, I realized what it was. And this time I really nailed it. I understood. I would have to be the world champion to really be happy. I graduated from high school. I had 2 years before I had to enlist in the military. And I took off to England. In England, I lived in London and joined Stripes, which was a squash club in Ealing Broadway, where Jansher Khan, world champion at the time, used to train. Because I said, this is my goal, this is my objective. And I would come in every single day and watch Jansher Khan and imitate him. Whatever he did, I would do. So he ran 7 miles each morning. I would run 7 miles each morning. He would go to the court, work out in the gym. I did exactly what he did. He played numerous games with other players. I would play numerous games with other players. And he had training partners. And I wasn't good enough at that time to be his training partner. So I would just hang out there. And once in a while when there was no one else around, he would say, come Tal, let's play a little bit. And we would play. And I went back to the drawing board after each game with him, and I would play harder and train harder, just what he did, because to be like him, to be the world champion, I would have to train like him. And I trained harder and harder, and I got better and better. And after about 6 months, I became good enough to be one of his training partners. And after a year, I became his regular training partners, and I would travel with him around the world. Wherever he would play tournaments, we would train before. However, injuries began to creep in. Why? Because Jansher had built up from literally the age of 3. He had built up his stamina, his fitness. And for me, it was all or nothing. Either I train like an amateur or don't train at all, or I train like the world champion. And my body couldn't handle it, and I started injuries. Initially, mild injuries. Ankle, I took 2 days off, or my knee started hurting a little bit, 3-4 days off. Back was a bit uncomfortable, nothing serious. I would go back to training, all or nothing. Either I don't train at all, or I train like the world champion, because I want to be like him. And I continued doing that for 4 years. Injuries on and off, getting more and more severe until at the age of 21, the doctor told me, you have a choice. You can continue training and playing professional squash, but then you're risking your back and you will probably need to be operated on very soon. Or you can give up professional squash. With an extremely heavy heart, I gave up professional squash. I gave up my dream, applied to college, and came here. Here, the exact same pattern continued. Only before it was squash, now it was academics that became the central part of my life. The knot returned very shortly after freshman week, because every paper had to be perfect. Every word had to be read and summarized. Every assignment had to be executed immaculately, all or nothing. And I was unhappy. And it was on one day during my sophomore year, as a 23-year-old sophomore, where I said to myself, enough. Enough. Here I am in such a wonderful place, with such wonderful students, such wonderful teachers, such a privilege, and I'm so unhappy. I don't think it is something that is external. I must understand myself better. And it was at that point that I decided to switch my concentration to philosophy and psychology, wanting to understand the meaning of a happy life, wanting to understand how I could become happier and why I was not. And it was very quickly that I realized that I understood that I was engaged or suffering from something that is so common, so pervasive, and so misunderstood: perfectionism.